Hello, welcome back. I'm Jeff Carpenter, and here we are again in our beautiful center of Dimensions of Heaven and Earth here in Scottsdale, Arizona. Today's episode of the Templar Spirit is going to focus on something that we really need to be looking at in the parallel world today. Our parallel world of spirituality, of growing, of trust in our own spirituality, of our own journey, leads to us wanting to find our tribe. Who are the people we trust? Who are the people that understand? Who are the people who've gone through some of this before? I mean, I like describing the fact that do you really want, as an Alcoholics Anonymous member, do you really want the person who's never seen a problem with drinking or never even had a drink? Or do you want the person who's gone through some of this and has understanding, compassion, and guidance for what we want to change? Nothing says that even more strongly than finding your tribe in your spiritual journey. The Knights Templar, in their core foundation, were really looking to establish that direct connection with God. The personal, direct, fulfilling connection with the divine that would then not just drive them towards their own spiritual expansion, but their physical, their spiritual, emotional, mental states, all of the energies would then be looking to align themselves in a way so that they could have the greatest impact for the world around them, bringing, as you can see, heaven to earth, bringing those practices, bringing that information, finding others that wanted to look for the same things. We're going to start our discussion today with some of the Templar practices that are actually mimicked, understood, and even encouraged in some of their friends. Now, one of the important parts about finding your own tribe includes the fact that you may not expect where they might be. You may not anticipate where you might find them. In many of the cases, our founding brothers talked about found, discovered, shared, exchanged, and continued to maintain relationships with some people, some cultures that were supposed to potentially, in the eyes of the general populace, to be enemies. The Crusades, interestingly enough, created a very powerful opportunity to find their tribe. Finding your tribe becomes such a comfort, even if you just believe that you have people who understand what you're going through. It changes your risk factors, it changes your confidence, but it also gives you that impulse to continue to expand because you may actually find a mentor, you may find someone who can give you pointers, you may find someone who will tell you about the potential pitfalls when you go into new environments or new modalities that you've never experienced before. The Templars took advantage of the wars, took advantage of the Crusades, to get them into the environments, the countries of many of their greatest soul brothers, many of their greatest connections for their spiritual growth. Let's talk about some of them. First off, we're going to talk about the Sufi. The Sufi are the mystics of Islam. How are they going to create that? Well, even the historical references of the Sufis come back to how people would gather at a mosque of the Prophet himself. And this comes back around the 7th century. If you really dig down into the basics, and this is what I want you listening for as we go through today's episode, what were they focused on? What were their teachings? What was the Prophet telling people that they should be practicing? What was he encouraging? Well, the Sufism, really is practicing the purification of the spirit, self-discipline. How are you going to manage yourself? To the point of asceticism. Asceticism is going to be your purity, your humility, your minimalist approach to goods. And they wanted that individual and personal connection to God. But even more importantly, as they were looking at those connections, they also wanted to create, invoke, and maintain that personal connection in the physical realm. taking God and making a direct connection to the individual in the physical realm by actions, by practices, by buildings, by rituals, by everyday activities. And it becomes very significant when you see that they were bringing forth that in the middle of all the strife and in the middle of all those wars, conflicts, potentially created angers and hatreds, and yet they're still looking to understand and eventually welcome the Knights Templar, completely different faiths, in order to then exchange information, exchange practices, and sometimes even have rituals together for how they're going to unite under that same banner of a personal identification with God. We move on to Judaism. Well, of course, there's the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah practices of mysticism include spiritual and esoteric practices. They're taught, and hopefully, if the stories are correct, the tradition discusses that the origination comes from Sinai. How are you then passing down from Sinai the entire discussions of the Kabbalah? Now, the word Kabbalah itself translates into received, as in knowledge, as in information, as in light. And the foundational book, the Zohar itself translates into radiance, like the radiance of light. We as people, in their traditions and practices and what they preached, we are a reflection of God. So not only are we looking to create that connection, we want to become that representation of how heaven is going to be represented on earth. As an individual, we get to work to expand that divine spark inside of us, that spirit, that connection that already has creation of our spirit within the physical, remember, that each of us gets to talk through the 10 emanations of divine essence. They're not just talking about and expressing the need for the connection to God. They're preaching and sharing ways to actually do it. What are the 10 emanations of your divine essence in your physical form? What are we doing? How are we doing it? And how is it changing? And why do we want to build on it? The Templars, with especially the founding fathers, including Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, including the monk orders that were created, found a great ally and a great set of teachers in the Kabbalah teachings, because you then are looking at new ways that they might not have experienced yet, new ways to then expand your own personal creation of your link to the divine. Christian mysticism. Now, yes, the Christians were looking at how the kings and the Pope and the founders, the pushers, the backers of the Crusades were pushing the information as to why. But just as an aside, would you, with everything we've talked about thus far in the series, would you believe that the founding fathers of the Templars really felt that to kill an infidel is not evil? To kill an infidel is a pathway to God? If you're looking at that as not being murder, then are you really practicing this direct connection to God as a reflection in you? I would argue no. I would argue that there were things that were done to excuse some of the atrocities, but I also would argue that we see these leaders in mysticism then looking to join together and find better ways to even talk about potentially ending some of this hatred and strife. Moving to the Christian mysticisms. It's still, and if you're seeing the thread here, it still refers to spiritual transformation through a personal and intimate connection to God. Your connection, not some surrogate in the middle, your direct representation and honoring of your connection to the Lord. The five senses then become critical for physical interaction. It's almost discussing the clairsenses of spirituality. How do you feel? What do you hear? What do you see? How are you then looking to identify the subtle energies where the divine is interacting with you through your senses? This also, this tradition of the Christian mysticism approaches, talks about solitude. So, and certainly from my perspective, I find this amazing. We're talking about solitude, science, and contemplation. How are you releasing worldly passions to connect to God's oneness? You're unifying yourself there. You're projecting yourself into that environment by your own physical habits, your thoughts, your practices, your humility, your sometimes vows of poverty, the poor man's soldiers of Christ. But solitude, science, and contemplation are not individual concepts, they're unified. We've been talking about that the entire series, even the other Mastering Energy series, is the science of alchemy is the transformation of energy. And then taking intention, putting it into quiet reflection, and then adding science and spirituality into the mix creates the greatest amount of transformation that you get to give yourself in order to ascend to where you want to be. Remember, this is all about where do you want to be. You may never reach that because it is a continuous journey of evolution of your spirit. But each one of these, the Sufi, the Kabbalah practitioners, the Christian mystics, all seem to be talking about the same evolution of self in order to promote and embody that connection directly to the divine, directly to God. Many of the Templars, many of the supporters, if you are familiar with the Cathars, the Albigensians, from southern France around the 13th century, they're a very big factor in the growth and expansion of the Templars. But they also are already practicing this individual connection to God, this individual connection and oneness in order to become enlightened and embody that teaching for someone else to watch. It wasn't just about the discussions of what you learn. Many of the contemplations, many of our considerations need to be around this idea of what the apostles were for Jesus. The disciples, I would argue they are the students. The apostles was almost a train-the-trainer approach. I want you to go out and teach others. And in all three of the specific categories we've discussed here, they had those mentors. They had those people who would take the teachings and want to pass it on, so that more and more people would understand that direct connection that they have available to them. The other thing about the Cathars is that a lot of their practices are Gnostic Christianity. Gnostic is the direct connection, it's the practices, but also Gnosticism comes from that word gnosis, meaning knowledge. The practice of what they were already doing, leading probably back to the Gnostic era, is then the discussions that they moved forward and the unity that they found with people who are allegedly enemies, yet had the same practices and the same spiritual goals of self-improvement. I'm always, for any one of you who know as my students, you know I always talk about the tools. Look at the search that the Templars had for all the tools that they could get. And the more tools you have in your toolbox, the easier and more varied your work can be to truly identify and resonate with the work you want to do as your evolution continues. But the Cathars were still practicing piety, the aesthetic actions, and a direct personal connection with God. Even their definitions of the afterlife were, I wouldn't say unique, because they found brothers around Europe and around Asia, but they were unique in many of what the general practices we're talking about. The transmigration of the soul through multiple lifetimes. Karma. You can call it whatever we want, but that afterlife approach of saying, yes, I need to keep working in all of my lifetimes, is one of the things they were already practicing before they even got into the area of Jerusalem. If you remember about our great friend and our patron saint, Saint Bernard de Clairvaux, one of his first acts, one of his first charges, was to go and discuss with the Albigensians, the Cathars, what they were doing, trying to bring them back under the fold, trying to give them better ideas on how to practice in the direct Catholic faith. He went there to help quell this potential heresy. However, he ended up being so intrigued by what they were practicing and how it made sense to him that he brought it back with him. Even the word heresy, which we'll talk about in a minute, is telling from where its foundation. Not necessarily how it became used in this time frame, but where the word comes from. We also look at what Saint Benedict followers were doing. The order of Cistercians were following the rule of the Benedictine monks. They followed the rule of Saint Benedict, with, funny enough, contributions from Saint Bernard de Clairvaux. The Cistercians became a powerful representation of how to minister to people around the land, and yet they were driven very strongly by the Templar rule and the founder of the Templar rule, Saint Bernard de Clairvaux. You have to consider what the practices became, and then everything about finding your tribe becomes more clear, and why you may want to hide it, why you may want to find your own locations in which to practice away from, let's say, prying eyes. The Cistercians, contemplation, silence, solitude. How are you finding your interconnectedness with God, the universe, the creation, and yourself? Where do you fit? How do you grow? How do you practice and push it? The Templar practices themselves were about how are we going to not just find our tools, but also emulate what we've seen in ways that then change the different functions that we're looking for in our personal connection. And finally, even that word heresy. I've always been fascinated by this because the Greek derivation, where it comes from, the Greek basis of the word heresy, is actually defined as one who has knowledge but decides. Think about that for a second. One who has knowledge, wisdom, understanding, expansion, and decides how to practice it. Think about then how the word heresy became the interpretation against specific religious practices by different orders. The heretics from a Greek foundation were actually people who had information and practiced different studies according to the knowledge they have. That is exactly why today we're talking about find your tribe. Find what raises you up. Spend less time thinking about what lowers you, because then you're blinding yourself to some of those opportunities you might find. Looking for your tribe includes identifying those who, if nothing else, have gone through what you've gone through. Giving you strength, understanding, even just relief that you don't have to hide who you wish to be. And with all of this, consider what the Templars then pursued in the entire new nation state of Portugal, where, if you recall, they were given 1/3 of the land to do what they willed with it. Finding your tribe means allowing yourself to integrate, allowing yourself to research, but finally allowing yourself the comfort and the strength of finding people who will lift you up, who've gone through what you're going through, who might even have better ways or new toolkit options for how you'd actually perform what you want to do. Notice that every single thing in here then talks about, our final words, intention. What are your intentions? Where do you want to go? How do you want to evolve your direct connection with the divine? You have to start the growth. Even if you're waiting for guidance and download, you're still choosing that approach for receiving. Find your tribe, and we'll be here in order to help you along your next steps. Thank you for joining us today. Good luck in finding your tribe, and we will be talking with you soon.